9. A week after Passover, my father cabled us from Vienna. He was well. A letter would follow. The letter came a few days later. It was written in Yiddish. He hoped we were well and had had a good Pesach. He had an unusual and very satisfying Pesach. He missed us and looked forward to being with us and with the Rebbe after the summer. Did my mother think she might possibly be able to come to Vienna for July and August? Early in June, Jacob Kahn flew to London and was away for 5 days. He and the artist whose retrospective he had gone to see had been close friends for 5 decades. He told me when he returned that the artist had barely managed to escape from Prague in the late 30s after discovering that his name was on a Gestapo list for arrest and execution without trial. His art was considered degenerate. "Art is danger to some people," he said. "Picasso used to say art is subversive." Did he enjoy the retrospective? I asked. I did not enjoy it. His art is not enjoyable. He is not Matisse. But he is a great artist, and the retrospective did him full justice. Had the artist been happy? I asked. No, the artist had not been happy. He had been tormented over what to do next. What kind of silly question had I asked? Had I ever known of a great artist who is happy? "Rubens," I said. He stared gloomily out the tall windows of the studio. "Perhaps," he said, "anything was possible with the Baroque." In the last week of June, my mother left by ship for Le Havre, and I moved into my uncle Yitzchak's house. Jacob Kahn told me he often spent his summers in Provincetown, but he had sculptures to complete, so he would be in New York all that summer. I spent the month of July traveling back and forth by subway between my uncle Yitzchak's house and Jacob Kahn's studio. I traveled there 2 or 3 times a week. I had my mother's permission to go to Jacob Kahn as often as he would want to see me. I needed only to tell my uncle or aunt that I was going and when I expected to be back. It was a stifling month, oppressive, with humid heat that remained through the nights. The asphalt of the streets softened in the heat. Subway ceiling fans blew the heat through the trains. I walked the streets drenched in sweat. I rode the subway drenched in sweat. I drew and painted drenched in sweat. I watched Jacob Kahn work stripped to the waist on the block of marble. I began painting stripped to the waist. My uncle Yitzchak walked into my room one evening and found me painting stripped to the waist and let me know he thought it indecent to be dressed like that. He had a responsibility to my parents. I was to cover my body and wear my ritual fringes. I painted and drew in the house wearing an undershirt and my ritual fringes. In Jacob Kahn's studio, I painted stripped to the waist. He said to me one day in the second week of July, "Asher Lev, there are 2 ways of painting the world. In the whole history of art, there are only these 2 ways. One is the way of Greece and Africa, which sees the world as a geometric design. The other is the way of Persia and India and China, which sees the world as a flower. Ingres, Cézanne, Picasso paint the world as geometry. Van Gogh, Renoir, Kandinsky, Chagall paint the world as a flower. I am a geometrician. I study cylinders, cubes, triangles, and cones. The world is structure, and structure to me is geometry. I sculpt geometry. I see the world as hard-edged, filled with lines and angles, and I see it as wild and raging and hideous and only occasionally beautiful. The world fills me with disgust more often than it fills me with joy. Are you listening, Asher Lev? The world is a terrible place. I do not sculpt and paint to make the world sacred. I sculpt and paint to give permanence to my feelings about how terrible this world truly is. Nothing is real to me except my own feelings. Nothing is true except my own feelings as I see them all around me in my sculptures and paintings. I know these feelings are true because if they were not true, they would make art that is as terrible as the world. You do not understand me yet, Asher Lev, my little Hasid, my sanctifier of the world, my half-naked painter with dangling payos and a paint-smeared skullcap. One day you will understand about the truth of feelings." He said to me 2 days later, "What are you painting?" I said, "A classmate." "Do you hate him?" I was quiet. "You hate him and are afraid to paint your hatred, yes?" I did not say anything. "It is a false painting. It reeks of cowardice and indecision. In art, cowardice and indecision can be seen in every stroke of a brush. If you hate him, paint your hatred or do not paint him at all. One must not paint everything one feels, but once you decide to paint something, you must paint the truth or you will paint green rot. This boy in your class, he mistreats you?" I nodded. "He is mean to you? He laughs at you?" I nodded. "These marks on his face, are there pimples?" I nodded. "And you hate him?" I nodded. Then paint him the way you feel about him. Use your lines and colors and shapes to make your statement simply and clearly. Do you understand? He came over to me later and peered at the canvas. He nodded slowly. It is an excellent painting. He looked at me soberly. I would not like to be hated by you, Asher Lev. He said to me the next day, Have you heard from your parents? I told him that I had received a letter that morning from my mother. They were well. My father was very busy. My mother was able to help him from time to time in his work. They missed me and sent their love. What work does your mother help your father with? Work. What work? It has to do with Russian Jews, I said. He regarded me out of suddenly narrowed eyes. My father has connections with Jews in Russia. My mother is getting her doctorate in Russian affairs. She helps him in some way. I don't know how. He was quiet. His tall, powerful, half-naked body seemed strangely rigid. Then he said very softly, Your parents are good people, Asher. Your father is a brave man. Finish your work, Asher Lev. It is almost time for you to go home. The following week, the 3rd week of July, we went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We walked through centuries of Byzantine and Western crucifixions. He showed me the development of structure and form and expression, and the handling of pictorial space. I saw crucifixions all the way home and dreamed of crucifixions all through the night. I told him the next day that I did not think I wanted to see any more crucifixions. He became angry. Asher Lev, you want to go off into a corner somewhere and paint little rabbis and long beards? Then go away and do not waste my time. Go, paint your little rabbis. No one will pay attention to you. I am not telling you to paint crucifixions. I am telling you that you must understand what a crucifixion is in art if you want to be a great artist. The crucifixion must be available to you as a form. Do you understand? No, I see you do not understand. In any case, we will see more crucifixions, and more resurrections, and more nativities, and more Greek and Roman gods, and more scenes of war and love, because that is the world of art, Asher Lev. And we will see more naked women, and you will learn the reason for the differences between the naked women of Titian and those of Rubens. This is the world you want to make sacred. You had better learn it well first before you begin. We went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art every day that week. People stared at us as we walked through the vast galleries. A tall, white-haired, mustached man explaining crucifixions and nudes to a short, white-faced, red-haired boy with dangling earlocks and a skullcap. He insisted that I come to him early Sunday morning in the 4th week of July. I came out of my Uncle Yitzchak's house a few minutes after 8 o'clock. The air was warm and humid. A hazy sun shone through the trees. The city seemed deserted. I waited a long time for a subway. I got to Jacob Kahn's studio a little before 10 o'clock. He opened the door, and I saw a girl standing in the sunlight that came through the wall of windows. She looked to be in her early 20s, had short raven hair and dark eyes, and was beautiful in a dark and somber way. She wore a brightly colored summer dress, and she regarded me curiously as I came into the studio. Jacob Kahn led me to a far corner. I have asked the girl to pose for you today, he said. I looked at him. She is an excellent model, and you will draw her in the nude. I felt myself beginning to sweat heavily and did not know what to say. I want you to see the contours and the rhythms with your own eyes. It is not enough to copy Titian and Ingres and Renoir. I did not say anything. I was trembling inside. I felt a choking heaviness in my throat and chest. Asher Lev listened to me. He was talking gently, but with tense insistence. The human body is a glory of sculpture and form. When an artist draws or paints or sculpts it, he is a battleground between intelligence and emotion, between his rational side and his sensual side. You do understand that. Yes, I see you do. The manner in which certain artists have resolved that battle has created some of the greatest masterpieces of art. You must learn to understand this battle. I looked over at the girl. She was gazing out the tall windows at the rooftops and the wide line of river beyond. Asher Lev, the Rebbe told me never to permit you to draw this way. I have chosen to disregard the Rebbe. The nude is a form of art I want you to master. To attempt to achieve greatness in art without mastering this art form is like attempting to be a great Hasidic teacher without knowledge of the Kabbalah. I did not say anything. The girl's face was luminous in the sunlight. I thought of Vermeer. There was a long, heavy silence. I will send her away, Jacob Kahn said finally. I'll try, I said. He gazed at me intently. I do not want to hurt you, Asher Lev. I'll try, I said again, feeling the choking tightness in my throat. Very well, he said, come with me. I followed him through the studio to the wall of windows. I had a sudden, powerful, numbing vision of my mythic ancestor. I thought of the Rebbe. I thought of the Mashpia. I found myself in front of the windows near the girl, listening to Jacob Kahn. You will begin with simple line drawings in charcoal. I want only the flow of the line. I want no chiaroscuro. He spoke briefly to the girl. She went behind a screen. I set my pad on an easel. She came out from behind the screen and sat on a chair. Sunlight fell across her face and shoulders and breasts and thighs. She sat with one leg crossed over the others, her head slightly back. I saw the sunlight on her skin. She was very beautiful. I did not even know her name. I saw the flowing curve of her breasts. I saw the line of shoulders and hip and thigh and leg. I drew her carefully. My arm felt nerveless, drained of its strength. I felt sweat in my armpits and along my back. My face dripped sweat. Jacob Kahn stood behind me, watching. I finished the drawing. It was very bad. I felt ashamed. I took a deep breath and moved to a clean sheet of paper and began again. The girl sat very still, bathed in sunlight. I looked at her and worked carefully, translating her body into lines, making choices, each curve, each subtle change in the flow of her flesh, necessitating and interpreting choice of line. I started a third drawing. Jacob Kahn signaled to her. She changed her pose, sitting forward on the chair, her face in her hands, her breasts suddenly pendulous. I drew her that way twice. She changed her pose again, sitting with one leg up on the chair, clasping the leg to herself with her arms, her chin resting on her knee, her thighs open. I drew her that way, and then drew her again in 2 more poses before it was time for lunch. I ate the sandwich my aunt had packed for me. Jacob Kahn and the girl went out to lunch and returned in less than half an hour. I spent all the rest of that day drawing the girl. She left shortly before 5 o'clock. Jacob Kahn piled my drawings one on top of the other on a table. He held up the first drawing. Then he held up the last drawing. "You see?" he said quietly. I saw. "And it is only in 1 day. A great eye learns to see quickly. We will do this again next Sunday, yes?" I nodded. "Do not look so sad, Asherlev. You are not defiled. You have only made some pictures of a beautiful girl. Beautiful pictures of a beautiful girl. Is that cause for defilement?" I did not respond. He looked at me and shook his head. "Perhaps Yeshivavoys and Pios should not be artists. Go home and take a shower and go to sleep, Asherlev. You have had a long day." I went home in a daze. I ate supper in a daze. I felt drained, suspended. I felt hot and irritated and unclean. I could not sleep. I saw the girl. I saw her body and the flow of her lines. I drew her in the darkness of the room. I drew her with my eyes, letting my eyes move slowly across her. I drew her slowly until there was again the sudden light and I was able to sleep. I drew her again the following Sunday, and it was easier. I drew her again the Sunday after that, and it was easier still. I had been traveling to Jacob Kahn's studio on Sundays and Tuesdays, and sometimes on Thursdays. Now I began to go almost every day. A few times he was not there, and I worked alone. On occasion in the late afternoons, artists would come in, men whose paintings I had seen in reproductions and in the Museum of Modern Art. I would listen to them talking with Jacob Kahn. It was during those late afternoon conversations that I learned about the social realists and regionalists of the Depression decade, about the Federal Art Project, about the mottos Paint Proletarian and Paint American, about Stuart Davis's attack against the regionalist John Stuart Curry, about the group called the America Abstract Artists and their rejection of Impressionism, Expressionism, and Surrealism, about neoplasticism and abstract cubism and Russian constructivism, about gesture painters and color field painters, about abstract expressionism. I painted and listened. I understood some of it and remembered most of it. Once the introductions and curious glances were over, they did not seem to care about my skull cap and earlocks. They only seemed to care about my painting. My parents returned to the United States by boat on the first Sunday of September. I did not see Jacob Kahn again until the middle of October. I barely recognized my father. He was gaunt. He limped badly. His eyes were tired. His beard was turning gray. He was nearly 40, but he looked to be 60. I cried inside myself when I first saw him. He came into my room 2 days before Rosh Hashanah and stood leaning against the wall near the doorway. I had turned the room into a small studio. An easel stood near the window. There were reproductions of great paintings all over the walls. My father stood near Andrea del Sarto's sculptor and Raphael's School of Athens. I had been working on a canvas when he had come in. I stopped and put down my brushes. "Please sit down, Papa." But he stood near the doorway and would not come further into the room. He was in his own home, but my room had become alien ground to him. He said wearily in Yiddish, "I have not even had a chance to talk with my son yet. How are you, Asher?" "I'm feeling well, Papa." "You look well. You look happy." He gazed slowly around the room at the reproductions on the walls, at the clutter of drawings on my desk and dresser and bed, at the canvases stacked beneath the window and along the wall near the closet. "You have been busy," he murmured. I was quiet. He looked at me. "Jacob Kahn is a good teacher?" "Yes." "I have known Jacob Kahn for a long time. He was one of those the Rebbe helped bring from Paris before the Germans came. He is a good person." "Are you well, Papa?" "Yes, but I am tired." "You've lost weight." "I have worked hard, but we are succeeding now. It was nearly creation out of nothing. Now there is something. In Paris and Rome and Vienna and Geneva there is now something." He looked at me sadly. "All this material, Asher, the paper and the paints and the easel, all this you bought with the money you made doing errands for your Uncle Yitzchak and Reb Yudel Krinsky?" "Mama helped. Jacob Kahn helped." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "I am not reconciled, Asher. I am unable to accept what you are doing. I have told the Rebbe I am not reconciled." I was quiet. "It is not possible for me to accept this." He moved his arm in a weary gesture, indicating the reproductions on the walls, the canvases near the window, the drawings on the desk. "This is not what I wanted from my son. In this matter I do not care what the Rebbe tells me. You are my son, not the son of the Rebbe. I am not reconciled. Asher, do you intend to go to college?" "I think so, yes." "You will continue to study with Jacob Kahn?" "Yes." "You will not be able to come to Europe?" "No." He nodded slowly. "The Rabbanu Shalom is sometimes unkind. What would it have hurt him to have kept the Sitra Archa away from you? What? Do not forget your people, Asher. That is all I ask of you. That is all that is left for me to ask of you." I was quiet. There was a long silence. He turned and started from the room. "Papa?" He looked at me. "Were you in Russia, Papa?" He blinked and stiffened. He said very quietly, "Sometimes there are questions that should not be asked, Asher. I also have questions I do not ask." I saw him looking at the drawings on my desk. I followed his eyes. He was looking at one of the drawings I had made of the nude model in Jacob Kahn's studio. I had signed and dated the drawing. The date stood out clearly beneath the signature. "Good night, Asher." He went quietly from the room. My mother said to me one day during Sukkos, "Asher, do you think you could move in with your Uncle Yitzchak if I went with your father to Europe?" I stared at her and was afraid. "Your father needs me. I was here when you needed me, and now your father needs me." "This year?" "No, next year." "I don't want to live a whole year with Uncle Yitzchak." "Why?" "I don't want to talk about it." "We'll talk about it," she said. "You are not the only member of this family with special needs." My father returned to Europe in the second week of October, and I resumed my journeys to Jacob Kahn's studio. I came into the kitchen one night in November and found my mother staring at the table. "Mama?" She looked up at me. "Is anything wrong, Mama?" "No, I was remembering." Her voice sounded strange. "Remembering?" "Yes." "What?" "Just remembering." Another night I found her standing alongside her table in the living room, gazing out the window at the dark street. The table was piled high with her books and papers. "Mama?" She did not respond. "Mama?" "Yes, Arya," she said softly. "Of course, I'm coming." "Mama, are you all right?" She turned then, startled. "Asher," she murmured. "Asher." She seemed small and frail, and I thought that she had been crying. One Shabbos night in December, we sat together at the dinner table, and after a pause during Ceremamos, she began to hum my father's melody to Yo Ribbon Olam. Her eyes were closed. She hummed softly. I had the feeling she was not aware of what she was doing. She opened her eyes and smiled faintly, Then she looked quickly around. She seemed surprised to find herself with me. She began another melody. I joined her, and we sang together. She said to me a few nights later, "You're out so late, Asher. What do you do in the library so late?" "I study." "For school?" "No, for Jacob Kahn." She looked at me in surprise. "Art history, reproductions. It's very important, Mama." "Can't you bring the books home, Asher?" "A lot of them are reference books, Mama." "It's very lonely here at night, Asher." At breakfast one morning in January, my mother said to me, "I finished my dissertation, Asher. The university is asking me about my plans for next year." "Shall I tell them I'll be in New York?" "Yes," I said. "Yes." She sighed softly and was quiet. I heard her in the living room late that night talking to herself in strained whispers. I had wakened from a dream about my mythic ancestor. I had not dreamed of him for a while now. He had made up for his absence. My heart pounded from the dream. I felt the blood in my head. I lay rigid in my bed and then heard my mother in the living room. She was whispering words I could not understand. Then I recognized the sounds of the words. She was whispering in Russian. I lay in my bed and did not know if I was more terrified by the dream or by my mother's whispers. After a while, she stopped. I heard her slippered feet come through the hall, and then she went into her room. I could not sleep. I turned on the light and went to the bathroom. I came back to the room and sat at the desk and could not draw. I went back to my bed. Faint light framed my window by the time I was able to sleep. Jacob Kahn watched me work on a painting in his studio that Sunday afternoon, and after a while he said angrily, "What are you doing? Stop it! You are making a mess! Where is the unity of form? The colors do not hold together. Wipe it out and start again." I put the brushes down. "What is the matter with you today? Are you ill?" "No." He looked at the canvas. "What were you painting?" "My mother." He looked at me. "You are not ready yet to move away from representational form. You think such painting is a joke?" I felt my face go hot. "No," I heard myself say. "I never thought it was a joke." "I am sorry," he said quickly. "That was a foolish thing to ask. I apologize. Now pick up your brushes and start again. You are making a painting. I do not care what your painting is about. First, it must be a painting. Straighten out your feelings inside you and make a painting. Or go home and take a shower and go to sleep." I wiped the face from the canvas, but I could not do anything else. I could not even paint a line. "I don't know what I want to say. I don't know how I feel." "Go home, Asherlev. We all have impossible days." My mother said to me sometime during the week, "Asher, why don't you want to live with your Uncle Yitzchak?" "I don't." "Why?" "I just don't." "You're not being nice," she said. "You're behaving like a child. A summer is all right, but not a whole year. Once you would have been delighted for our permission to live with your Uncle Yitzchak." I did not say anything. "I have to make a decision in the next few weeks, Asher. The university has begun hiring staff for the coming year." "I don't want to be alone, Mama." "I know," she said, "but it may be time for you to concern yourself with what others want, Asher. You're not the only person with needs in this world." I could not sleep that night. The next night I slept and dreamed of my mythic ancestor, who came thundering through dark primal forests of tall, moist trees, shouting at me in a voice that splintered the words into long slivers of metal. I woke and remained awake the rest of the night. The next morning I fell asleep over my Gemara in class, and was awakened by the teacher's heavy hand on my shoulder. He was a short, round man with a dark beard and glittering dark eyes, and he was considerably less indulgent toward me than my other teachers had been. "Rembrandt sleeps," I heard him say in Yiddish. "The whole world must hold its breath while Rembrandt sleeps." Soft laughter moved through the classroom. Eyes fastened upon the teacher. I had been the butt of their laughter for years now, and I was still unaccustomed to it. The teacher glared down at me. "Listen, Rembrandt Lev." There was loud laughter. "In my class no one sleeps. You have to sleep, go home. In my class we study Torah. We do not study how to sleep. If you fall asleep again in my class, I will make life bitter for you. Do I make myself clear? Are my words simple enough for you to understand? If you fall asleep and make people say shasha, I will make your life bitter like Galgal." There was a slowly widening ripple of laughter as the explanation of the play on the name Chagall was whispered through the room. The teacher turned and walked up the aisle to his desk. That was the day someone slipped a note into my Gemara during the lunch recess. I found it when I returned to my desk. It was written in ink on white paper and printed in block letters. Modigliani, Paskin, and Soutine worked in ochres and ultramarine. Soutine lived in strife, Paskin took his life, and Modigliani used drugs for cuisine. I looked up from my seat in the back row of the room. I felt the blood in my face and head. I looked carefully through the room. The teacher's voice droned dully over a passage Gemara. A few seats in front of me, to my right, I saw a student's head begin slowly to turn in my direction. I looked quickly down at the poem. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched the smile spread quickly across the pimply face. I could almost hear the high-piercing voice. "Here comes Asher Picasso Lev, the destroyer of Torah. Make way for Goy Lev. Hey Asher, do you draw dirty pictures too? Draw a dirty picture for the Mashpia. Draw me, Asher Lev. No, draw me, Asher Lev. Draw me. Draw me." I folded the note and put it into one of my pockets. I could see the block letters and the words. Soutine lived in strife. Paskin took his life. I saw those words all the rest that day, and in school, and was still seeing them that night as I lay in my bed trying to fall asleep. The next day there was another note in my Gemara. Asher Lev won't go to Hev, to hell he'll go, far down below. That night I found myself seated at my desk, shaking with rage. I sat in front of a blank sheet of drawing paper and felt the rage like a wild torrent inside me. I had never felt such rage before. I wanted to kill him, to beat him and smash him and kill him, so I would never again have to see his pimply face or hear his piercing voice. I drew a line on the paper. Then I drew circles and points and whorls. I made more lines. I looked at the paper. It was meaningless and absurd and very bad. I threw it away. My mother said to me on Saturday night, "I will be back late. Don't wait up for me." "Is the meeting about Russian Jews, Mama?" "Yes." "Are you going to talk to the Rebbe about next year?" "Yes." "I don't want you to go away, Mama." "I know what you don't want." "Good night, Asher." I worked a long time on a canvas in Jacob Kahn's studio the next day. I avoided recognizable forms. He came over to me and peered at the canvas. "It is interesting," he said, "but it is a failure." I put my brushes down. "Your feelings about your mother are producing terrible art. Paint still lifes for a while. Do some self-portraits. You are making a mess with these other efforts." He was merciless over failure. The subway ride back home that night was a torment. The next day I found another copy of the first poem in my Gemara, Modigliani, Paskin, and Soutine, and 2 days later I found Asher Lev won't go to Hev. My mother was at a meeting that night, and I was alone in the apartment. I wandered through the silent rooms, stopping for a moment to gaze through the living room window at the parkway outside. The street had begun to feel quietly hostile to me, as if resentful of my journeys away from it and of the alien skills I brought back each time I returned. The metal lampposts felt cold to my eyes. The light they cast seemed filled with darkening mists. The trees swayed in a winter wind, their naked branches black in the night and strangely insubstantial. I saw it then, quite suddenly, and knew what I could do. 1 second there had been nothing, and then there was the idea. I did not understand what had happened to bring on the idea. I went away from the window and came into my room. Sitting at my desk, I drew with a pen, working slowly, calmly, and with ease, the segment from Michelangelo's Last Judgment of the boat beached on the Styx, and Charon striking at his doomed passengers with an oar, forcing them onto the shores of torment and hell. I drew much of it from memory, but I wanted to be as accurate as I could, so I checked it repeatedly against a reproduction in a book I had purchased on Michelangelo. I drew the writhing, twisting, tormented bodies spilling from the boat. I drew the terror on the faces of the dead and the damned. I made all the faces of his pimply, scrawny, eyes bulging, mouths open, shrieking in horror. I exaggerated the talons and painted ears of Charon. I darkened his face, bringing out the whites of his raging eyes. I folded the drawing and went to bed. The next day, on my way out of the classroom for the noon recess, I slipped the drawing into his Gemara. I saw the sudden stiffening of his shoulders when he found it. I saw him stare at it. I saw him turn to look at me and then stop. He crumpled the drawing, but he did not throw it away. He put it into a pocket. That night I drew a segment from the Last Judgment of a man being pulled headlong into hell by serpentine demons. I drew his face on the man and put the drawing into his Gemara the next day. He said nothing to me about the drawings, but he began to avoid me. His thin face would fill with dread whenever he caught me looking at him. I had the feeling he regarded me now as evil and malevolent, as a demonic and contaminating spawn of the other side. I did not attempt another painting of my mother that Sunday. Instead, I did a painting of the boy in my class at the moment he saw the first drawing I had slipped into his Gemara. Jacob Kahn called the painting evil and excellent. 2 days later, my mother told me she would be going to Europe at the end of June and would remain there throughout the coming year. I was to live with my uncle Yitzchak, or I could come with her to Europe and live in Vienna. "Asher, look at me," she said in response to my pleas. "How many of me do you see?" I did not answer. "You see only one. There is only one of me. I can be only in one place at a time. Your father needs me. Do you understand? And I want to spend the year with your father. I don't want to talk about it anymore. The Rebbe approved of the decision. Your father will remain in Europe, and I will join him at the end of June." "Papa will not come back for Pesach?" "No." She became angry when I continued to plead that she stay. Pink spots colored her high cheekbones. Her voice became strident. She called me a child. She said that 6 children would not have made more demands on her than I had. Now it was time for my father. He needed her. Did I understand that? He needed her. He was exhausted from his work, and he wanted her to be with him. If I wanted her too, I would have to come to Vienna. She stormed angrily from the room. I talked with Jacob Kahn. "Yes," he said, "I know all about it. Your mother called me." "I don't want to live with my uncle." "Why not?" "He's loud and fat and rich." "There's nothing wrong with being rich. It is the rich who buy paintings. It is when you are bought by the rich that you will know you are a successful artist." "He's a bore." "You will have to grow accustomed to it. The world will indulge you just so long, Asher Lev, and then it will stop. You will simply have to grow accustomed to that truth." The Mashpia called me into his office during the first week of April. The Rebbe wanted to see me alone. For the second time in my life, I climbed the flight of stairs into the Ladover building and went along the hallway to the waiting room. This time, the room was crowded. I was there almost an hour before Rav Mendel Dorochov took me into the Rebbe's office. The Rebbe sat quietly behind the bare desk. His eyes were dark. Outside the arched window, the street glittered in the April night. "Sit down, Asher. There, yes, sit down. It has been a while since I have seen you, but I have been kept informed. Yes, they tell me the world will hear of you one day as an artist." I was quiet. "I have you in my mind and heart, Asher Lev. I pray to the Master of the Universe that the world will one day also hear of you as a Jew. Do you understand my words? Jacob Kahn will make you an artist, but only you will make yourself a Jew." I was quiet. There was a long silence. The street throbbed faintly beneath its dark canvas of night. "Asher." "Yes, Rebbe?" "Your mother has told you of my decision." "Yes, Rebbe." "It is necessary for your father and mother to be together now, for your father's health and for your father's work. You will live with your uncle and continue to study with Jacob Kahn." "Yes, Rebbe." "You will behave toward your uncle and aunt as you would toward your father and mother. They have accepted the responsibility of caring for you." "Yes, Rebbe." Outside the window, the street vibrated softly, menacingly in the black night. "Asher Lev." "Yes, Rebbe." "You are entering the world of the other side. Be careful. I knew your grandfather. I knew your mother before you were born. I remember you as a child. I remember your mother's illness. Your family is very precious to me. I have looked upon you as a son. I have you and your parents constantly in my mind and heart. Be careful of the other side, Asher Lev." "Yes, Rebbe." "I give you my blessings and my good wishes for a kosher and joyous Pesach." I went quickly along the hallway and down the stairs and out into the dark street. It was cold. The street was cold. I saw a cobblestone square and a dilapidated building and trees. I saw a young man drawing figures in the dust of the square, using a stick and drawing in one continuous line the contours of hens and horses and birds. Steep, narrow streets led from the square. The square was warm. Sunlight fell across the trees and the old building and the young man gazing at the hens and horses and birds in the dust out of burning dark eyes. My street was cold now in the April night. I felt it cold against my face as I turned into the apartment house where I lived. I felt it cold all through the first 2 days of Passover. Then I journeyed to galleries in Manhattan and was on streets filled with color and form. My father was not home. I had no school until the end of the festival. I used the intermediate days of the festival to wander along streets warmer than my own. I wandered into Anna Schaefer's gallery. It was a large modern gallery taking up the entire fourth floor of a tall building in the 70s along Madison Avenue. I came out of the elevator and saw her sitting behind an ornate, intricately carved desk at the far end of the gallery to my left. She saw me and motioned me over to her. She seemed delighted. The gallery was crowded. There was a sculpture show that had received excellent notices and was attracting a great deal of attention. There were people at the desk, but she talked to me alone in a back room stacked with canvases and sculptures. Yes, she knew exactly how I was getting along. Did I know Jacob Kahn was having a show in late October? I didn't know. Did I know he would be spending the summer in Provincetown painting and that he would take me with him? I didn't know. She stared at me. You are Asher Lev? Yes. You are the student of Jacob Kahn? Yes. What do you do in the studio? I paint. You do not talk to each other? We talk. He is a wicked old man. He is waiting to surprise you. Do not let on I said a word. Promise. I promised. She came with me to the elevator. One day you will have your own show here, Asher Lev. Then you will be famous and we will be rich. Do not forget to act surprised when that wicked old man tells you. He told me 2 weeks later. I acted surprised. The days grew warm. The street remained cold. My mother had begun the preparations for her journey. She purchased clothes. She shipped part of her library to an address in Vienna. She rented our apartment to a family that had recently arrived from Russia. She attended meetings with the Rebbe's staff. She defended her dissertation and received her doctorate. She seemed filled with new energy. She did everything quickly, radiantly. Sometimes I would hear her singing to herself. She seemed fulfilled. One day, movers came and took away the small table in the living room that had been her desk. She had decided to ship that as well to the address in Vienna. It had good memories, she said. She wanted to be near that table. I stared at the empty space in the living room where it had stood, and it seemed a chasm now lay across the floor and with a wall near the window. I wandered the cold street. In Jacob Kahn's studio, I began to paint my memories of my early years on that street. I painted my mother young with myself in her arms. I painted her holding me. I painted her walking with me. I painted us together on a parkway bench. I painted us standing against tall buildings. I painted us walking through Prospect Park. I painted us in a dreamlike green land with distant hills and pale clouds in a deep blue sky. Week after week, I painted my mother and myself together, though I did not always give the mother and the child our faces. Jacob Kahn watched me in silence. One Sunday in June, he stood behind me as I worked on a huge canvas of a mother and child seated on a mound of grass beneath tall, leafy trees. I heard him say softly, Asher Lev, do you have any idea what you were doing? I told him I was painting a mother and her child. He said nothing more to me about those paintings. On the last Thursday in June, my mother and I took a cab to a dock in Manhattan. I held her to me. I was as tall as she was now. She cried. The cabin was narrow. I held her to me and felt her small and frail in my arms. Have a safe journey, Mama, I said. Later I stood on the dock and watched the huge ship pull away. I took a cab back to my street. I stood outside the building, looking up at the window of our living room, and then I walked slowly beneath the cold trees to my Uncle Yitzchak's house.